In this video, we're going to walk you through how to use the seller closing costs calculator available at Hauseit.com. So this is the interface of the calculator. If you're not already on this page, to get here, go to Hauseit.com and in the toolbar, click on Calculators, Sell, and it'll be right here. There are also a couple other calculators if you're interested in doing a deeper dive on some of the closing costs for sellers. In particular, we have the transfer tax calculator, the co-op flip tax calculator, as well as the co-op tax deduction calculator. Going back to the seller closing cost calculator, the left side is where you're going to be putting your inputs. Obviously, these three inputs have an impact on how big your seller closing cost bill is going to be. The most important consideration is the sale price. In this case, we can start with a hypothetical example. We'll say you're selling a $750,000 co-op in the East Village. And let us go ahead and click on co-op. And we want to assume in this case, you probably have an existing mortgage. Your standard mortgage term of 30 years is much longer than your average hold period for an apartment in the city. So we're going to go ahead and click on yes to existing mortgage. The breakdown of closing costs here is going to be on the right-hand side. And as you can see, you're in for a bit of a shock. 10% is the estimated closing cost bill for you as a percentage of your sale price for a $750,000 co-op with an existing mortgage. Now, if we look at the totals here, we're going to see that the majority of the actual closing cost comes in the form of a broker commission. It is pretty well known that commissions here in New York City are not only some of the highest in the country, but also some of the highest in the world. Just by way of comparison, if you go to the UK, if you go to London, very similar city, many people consider it to be a sister city of New York, and over there the average commission is a little bit less than half. So you pay about 3% or less if you're selling an equivalent property in London, whether it's an apartment or a townhouse. For a co-op, since we've selected that, we also have what's called the co-op flip tax. Now, co-op flip taxes do vary by building. They are essentially an additional private seller closing cost that you have to pay at closing. The difference is that the money that you pay the co-op goes directly into their coffers, and they generally use it to pay for operating expenses of the building, perhaps also to build their reserve fund. Because of the co-op flip tax, it is fair to say that seller closing costs are going to be a little bit lower for a condo or for a house compared to a co-op. We can prove that by just changing the input here under housing type. So let's pretend that you're selling a co-op. If we click on that, your closing costs are going down to about 8.5%, with a house just slightly under 8.5% compared to, I would say, over 10% for a co-op. Now, in terms of other closing costs here, the second and third largest components for most transactions are the city and state transfer taxes. The New York City transfer tax is, in this case, 1.425%. There is a lower tax bracket of 1%, which we would expect to pay if the sale price, according to this chart, is less than or equal to $500,000. So you can actually pull this up by going to the Hauseit website or Google for the Hauseit article on transfer taxes. So if we look down here again, New York City transfer tax rates are either 1% or 1.425%. So if we went back to the calculator and we put in $500,000, we would notice that the New York City transfer tax has gone down to 1%. If we increase it to $500,001, we're back up to 1.425%. Going after the transfer taxes, the city transfer taxes, we have the New York State transfer tax. This is customarily 0.4%. However, there is now, as of 2019, a higher New York State transfer tax rate of 0.65%. And as you can see, that applies to sale prices greater than or equal to $3 million. As far as other closing costs are concerned, the rest of the ones you're going to find here are essentially fixed costs. So it doesn't matter really what the sale price is. The rest of these are going to be pretty much the same. Specifically, your seller's attorney fee. It really doesn't matter whether you're selling a $500,000 co-op or a $2 million co-op. On average, the seller's attorney, your lawyer, is going to charge you a fixed fee, and it generally won't vary just because the property is more or less expensive. There are obviously exceptions to the rule. If it's a special situation, if it's an estate sale, if there's something more complex, the seller's attorney may charge you a little bit more. A customary attorney fee in the city is anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000. There are attorneys who will charge you less. There are attorneys who will charge you more. It is very important, however, when you pick an attorney that you make sure the lawyer is responsive, a good communicator, easy to deal with, and also thorough. It's quite common to see deals essentially fall apart when two attorneys cannot see eye to eye. So think of an attorney as more than somebody who is mitigating risk. Think of an attorney also as somebody who needs to be a good deal maker. One other note of caution, if you do find an attorney who's working for a very small amount of money, you just want to make sure that you're going to get good service and they're going to be responsive. There is nothing binding about an accepted offer in New York City. So imagine you're well into the sale process and you find a buyer and you have an accepted offer. You come to find out that 5 days have passed and your attorney still hasn't sent the draft contract to the buyer. The buyer doesn't know that you've hired a discount lawyer. They're simply assuming that you've probably accepted another offer or you're no longer interested in selling your home to them. So just make sure, regardless of which attorney you hire, that they will be very, very responsive and that they'll promise you to send out the draft of the contract within a day or maximum 2 days from the time that you have an accepted offer on your property. Essentially, every condo or co-op is going to charge you a move-out fee and or deposit. They may also charge you possibly a managing agent fee to coordinate the closing. If you have an existing mortgage, there are some fees you'll have to pay as well. Directly to the bank, they include bank loan satisfaction fees, co-op attorney fees, UCC3 termination fee, non-deed transfer fee, and a co-op stock transfer tax. A lot of closing costs. In this case, the ones down here are pretty inexpensive. So just going back to the closing costs towards the top here, move-out deposit, move-out fee, anything related to a building, you're obviously not going to pay if you're selling a townhouse. There is no board, there is no managing agent. It's real property, you own it. So if you click on house, you're going to see the closing costs go down quite a bit. I would say the better comparison is condo versus house, not co-op versus house, because of the fact that co-op does usually have a flip tax. So if we do a condo, we're at 8.5, house, we're at a little over 8. So very small difference, but of course, you're paying a little less in seller closing costs. Going back to the co-op, just one important thing to note, as it relates to the flip tax, a building can charge whatever flip tax it wants, and a building can also implement a flip tax after you've made a purchase. So even if you buy into a co-op that does not have a flip tax, it is within their power, if the board votes it in, for them to implement a flip tax. A flip tax can either be a percentage of the sale price, it can be a percentage of the profits, or it could be a per share amount. It would be a set dollar amount, which you would multiply by the number of shares assigned to your property. There may even be a possibility that a co-op has some sort of hybrid formula between all three of those mechanisms. The way to figure out your building's flip tax if you're a seller is to ask the managing agent. You could also check in the house rules or the bylaws. And if the flip tax has recently been implemented, you will surely have received some sort of announcement, notification, something for your reference that will tell you not only what the new flip tax is, but from when it takes effect. It is possible that a flip tax may only take effect at some point in the future. So if you're able to sign a sale contract prior to that date, you may qualify for the previous, presumably lower flip tax rates. Another interesting thing for us to point out is possible savings you can attain with regard to your transfer tax. Now, this comes into play if your purchaser is financing the deal and you have an existing mortgage. If you have an existing mortgage, it is possible for you to actually assign some or all of your mortgage to the purchaser. Now, by doing this, you reduce the amount of new loan size that has to be originated. And whatever amount you transfer, let's say you have a mortgage of 400,000. If you transfer that amount, you do not have to pay the New York State transfer tax of 0.4% on the amount you transfer. So think of that as possible savings. But in order for that to happen, the buyer also has to agree to do this. It's called a purchase CEMA, CEMA. Now, there are some savings that the buyer achieves by way of doing the purchase CEMA, and they actually save more money than you as the seller. The buyer does not have to pay the mortgage recording tax, which is well over 1.5% on any amount of the loan which is transferred from you to them instead of originated and created as a new mortgage. So essentially what normally happens is the seller saves around 0.4%. The buyer can possibly save, I would say, closer to 2%. But in order for this to happen, buyer and seller have to agree. So as a seller, you have a lot of leverage here. You're certainly not going to agree to it if they save more money than you. So customarily, the buyer and seller agree to do the purchase CEMA, and they usually agree to more or less split the savings between both parties. Other ways to save money on commission are as follows. You could potentially, list your home online for sale by owner. There's a couple of downsides to doing that. The main downside of that is most buyers in the city have buyer brokers, and these buyer brokers, they look for listings in the broker database, which in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, in fact, is called RLS, possibly even MLS Long Island, depending on where you are in Queens. So if you list your property online, FSBO, the buyer agents don't see your listing, and even if they do, they don't have that assurance as per the MLS code of conduct and the agreements that brokers sign that they'll receive a commission. So really you have very little demand if you try to list FSBO. Perhaps a better solution is to list via an agent-assisted FSBO flat fee option that is available through Hauseit. With that model, you would, as the seller, manage the sale process. You would negotiate, show the property, work on the board package, and you would just pay a small flat fee for the online advertising to be put in the MLS, as well as relevant websites online. So you would save up to 6% in commission if the buyer does not have an agent. If the buyer has a buyer agent and you accept that offer, you would pay whatever commission you offered to buyer agents in the MLS. So assuming you do the agent-assisted FSBO flat fee listing option, buyer comes direct without an agent, your closing cost bill would not be 10%, it would be closer to 4%. Another option, if you have less time and you're not able to dedicate it to running the sale process yourself, would be the 1% listing fee full service option available through Hauseit as well. Under that model, you would certainly be able to reduce the closing cost line item as it relates to commission for brokers. So a couple of ways to do it. Certainly think you should explore your options and try to figure out ways to save, because any amount of money that's taken away from your sale through closing costs obviously dilutes the amount of money you're able to reinvest into a new home. It also eliminates the possibility for you to invest any of that money in the stock market or other long-term ways to appreciate capital, generate your net worth over time. We hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave us a comment below the video. And if there's anything we can do to create more explainer videos, if you have any other questions, we are happy to work on those. Just give us a shout.